All right, so Tommy is here with me. So for this segment, we're going to be talking about lower end mid tier stopgap bigs in free agency. So Tommy, last time we talked about the quote unquote next cornerstone big that the Lakers should trade for to pair next to Luka Doncic. Today, let's focus on free agency. Let's assume the Lakers have anywhere from the veteran minimum exception to the BAE, which is around like $5 million, all the way up to the full MLE of around $12.8 million. This is all TBD, depending on what LeBron James does with his opt out, if he takes a pay cut, depending on what DFS does with his player option. Let's not get into the nitty gritty of the cap logistics. But the baseline question here is, who are the best stopgap bigs the Lakers can look at this summer? And I want to start with, well, actually, before I start with any category, I wanted to ask you if you've taken a look at this upcoming free agency class, if there are any bigs that you're sort of eyeing. And again, these are lower tier, lower end guys who are more stopgap than some of the premier cornerstone names that we talked about last time.
So other than our own guys, meaning, Hayes and
Right.
Koloko, the one guy who stands out to me, and this is sort of, and my caveat is it's not like I assume many others have watched a ton of real games. I mean, maybe highlights, and stuff from time to time I've seen, but my calculus on all of this has sort of changed. Seeing how the team has looked playing in lineups without a true five. I think we do need a five and we need more five depth. But on the other hand, I'm also, sort of becoming more on the camp of like our roster construction is not, it doesn't warrant or justify, depending on the player, but certainly based on the available market currently, it doesn't really justify overpaying for a center. Um, you look at the other teams around the league, the top teams. Boston obviously has Horford and Porzingis, but they have other cap issues that they're going to be dealing with the next couple of years. Cleveland has their bigs, but I think Mobley is still on his rookie extension. I'm not sure, but he's not being paid like the supermax salary he's going to get eventually. And then, OKC, because everyone on their team is 25 or 23, they can afford to overpay Hartenstein at like 30 million. So, we don't really fall into any of those buckets. We're going to pay Luca a huge amount. We're paying LeBron. We're going to have to pay Reeves. Like, I guess all of this is a long way of saying I think the lower salary guys, at least in the short term, while the market is this dry, makes sense to me. And to that end, someone who I think could be like a sort of Jackson Hayes like project player who we could develop would be somebody like Jericho Sims,
Mm.
who I think is currently on the Bucks. Not a name that stands out, but it's to a lot of people probably, but he's 6'10". His wingspan is good. I think it's like 7'3", 7'4". He's a high motor guy. And basically that's what I'd be looking for is like a minimum level guy who's high motor, because if he has the right measurables and he's high motor, I think JJ and his staff have sort of shown that they can mold that into a serviceable player. They've done it like, Hayes is obviously pretty talented as a former lotto pick, but they've sort of done that with Hayes, right? I mean, he's shown things this season that he had only shown in very, very small bursts in prior years, and he's shown it for significant stretches this season. So anyway, hey, Jericho Sims is someone, on paper who seems like he could make sense to me based on those criteria.
Hmm. Yeah, that's funny that you bring up Jericho Sims because if the Lakers hadn't landed Mark Williams, I believe he was on their trade target radar to go and get as well. Now, my only thing about Sims, because Sims is a very explosive vertical lob threat, a lot like Jackson Hayes. My only concern with Sims is the fact that he's almost too redundant to Hayes, and I'm not sure whether we want two Jackson Hayes type players, but I don't know. Maybe there is a lot of untapped upside there. And maybe if, for those who have watched him day in, day out, maybe he has a higher sort of defensive fundamental IQ than Jackson Hayes does. But yeah, that's an interesting name, especially if you can get him for the veteran minimum.
So, I've sort of had a change of thinking around duplicative talent at the five position. And the main reason for that is, you know, if you're playing a five, like I get the okay, we want one the guy who could be a lob threat and maybe one guy who could space a little bit. I guess like the spacing centers who are available at a reasonable market price are usually a little bit undersized. And once you go like a little bit undersized, you're starting to enter the territory of like, how much am I really getting playing this guy versus playing Dorian Finney-Smith, who can actually switch and defend and, has length and can also fill some minutes as like a small ball five. And so I know that what's his face on the Warriors, that random dude whose name I always forget, because the guy's been bombing threes for them. He's like a random rookie post or whoever,
Quinton
like
Post, yeah.
Quinton Post, like he's worked out very well for them. I think that's the exception. You know what I mean? And you could in that system, they sort of lucked out, I think, with that talent. But I think for our purposes, we have all these like forwards with length. And at some point, you're talking about 6'10 guys, 6'8 guys. The 6'8 guys are a little bit undersized, but can defend and switch and shoot. And then is it really worth getting a center who's a couple inches taller, but doesn't give rim protection, but he could just shoot? I don't know that really like fills a void that's empty on the roster. So that all of that is a long way of saying that's why I've sort of come around to like
Hmm.
being okay with some duplicative talent with Hayes, which by the way, I think like, to a certain extent, Koloko is duplicative with Hayes, but I would,
Sure.
I would be happy keeping him too.
Sure. Although I don't know how fans feel about Jackson Hayes after his no show in the playoffs, even though there was some misutilization on JJ Redick's part. And so I'm not sure what fans' appetite for bringing Jackson Hayes back is currently. And I don't know if they'd be particularly excited to have two raw, undisciplined Jackson Hayes prospects in their hands. Even though I think Jericho Sims is a better prospect than Hayes because he's stronger and bulkier. Sims is almost like if you fuse Trey Jameson and Jackson Hayes together because Sims has a stronger base and center of gravity. Um, but yeah, to your point, the Mavericks last year had Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, and they were pretty duplicative as well.
Right.
Okay, I didn't think we'd spend this much time talking about Jericho Sims, but he was one of the names that I wanted to talk about later when it comes to the younger guys. But let's loop back first and talk about some veteran options in free agency. For the purposes of this discussion, we are going to leave out unrestricted free agent Miles Turner because that just doesn't seem like a realistic option. So let's go towards the veterans who have experience. And let's start with a list of traditional centers. So, burly, bruising big men first. I'll give you a list of 5 names, and you tell me if you like any one of them, and give me your like top 2. Let's start with Steven Adams, Houston Rocket currently, Kevon Looney, Clint Capella, Mason Plumlee, and Andre Drummond, who has a player option. So out of these, like traditional bigs who are stronger, eat up space in the paint, and can rebound, Steven Adams, Kevon Looney, Clint Capella, Mason Plumlee. Who do you like, and who would you prefer? Your top 2.
So I think due to the veteran experience and the fact that they really are big bodies in the paint, I would lean Capella and Steven Adams. The price has to be
Mm-hmm.
right for both of these guys. I think the thing with Adams is he's in a system in Houston. He doesn't play a ton of minutes. Obviously, Sengun is playing most of the minutes at the five. They do some small ball looks, even with Jabari Smith Jr. at the five. So Adams only plays like 10 minutes, 12 minutes a game for them. He might, be doing that for us too. But I guess my point is when you're only playing 12 minutes a game and your knees are totally cooked, it's a little bit easier to hide that, right? But for a reasonable salary, I think he makes a lot of sense. He's an aggressive rebounder to this day. I mean, we've seen it firsthand when we have to deal with the Rockets. Like, nobody wants to deal with Steven Adams on the glass. He'll come into the game and play 10 minutes and get you 3 or 4 offensive rebounds on that time. Rim protection, I don't know. It's not the same as it was in his prime, but he's so strong and he has really good hands and defensive positioning. Clint Capella, again, I think is a guy who could be helpful. I think he everyone's sort of written him off, but in the last couple of years, but I think a big part of that write-off is he's just been overpaid. For a reasonable salary, I think he can do a lot of things that would be, interesting. He can still catch. I mean, again, he's not the same explosive player he once was, but he's got good length. He can catch some lobs. He blocks shots. He gets rebounds. And, if he was willing to take the BAE and accept a smaller role, I think he could help a lot.
Yeah, those are my top two as well. Steven Adams, number one, Clint Capella, number two. Steven Adams, by the way, I didn't know he was only 31. For whatever reason, I thought he was like already 36 years old. But I just like that he's an enforcer. And for 15 minutes a night, he's going to go out there and bang down low, pause. He sets very solid screens, mountains of a screen, erases people completely. And overall, he just has high basketball IQ. You're not going to be afraid that he's going to do something stupid out there. So that's kind of why I sort of lean towards Steven Adams. Clint Capella, still, I think he's still a great rebounder. He's still got motor, and obviously he's built like a rock. So I wouldn't mind either of these two. So yeah, I think Steven Adams and Clint Capella would be my top two in this list. Although honestly, I'm also very down for Andre Drummond as well. That may come as a surprise to some people, but you could very easily convince me to take Drummond over Capella at this point because Andre Drummond does one thing very, very, very well. He rebounds the ball.
Yeah.
And he averaged nearly 8 rebounds this season for the Sixers in just 19 minutes. Last season, he averaged 9 rebounds in just 17 minutes. Those are insane rebounding rate numbers. And for a team like the Lakers, I didn't think they were that terrible defensively, even against the Timberwolves. I thought they did a pretty good job defending teams' first shots and attempts. But where they struggled was being able to actually clean up those possessions because
Yes.
they constantly give up second chance points and offensive rebounds. And that's where their defense really faltered because they can't sustain 2 or 3 attempts at the rim in one possession. And Drummond is the exact type of rebounding big that we can use to help clean up those possessions. Now, I wouldn't consider him like a starting center or a defensive anchor, but he'd probably be our best rebounder in the LeBron James and Anthony Davis era. Obviously, our best rebounder since Anthony Davis, but the stats show that Drummond is an even better rebounder than Anthony Davis in his career. Per 36 wise, Drummond averaged 15 rebounds, 19 rebounds, and 19 rebounds the last 3 seasons. Those are just insane numbers. So if Andre Drummond opts out of his player option, I would not mind giving him the taxpayer MLE or a portion of the non-taxpayer MLE just to help us secure some defensive rebounds. Yeah, so I think the only big man on this list that I wouldn't be too excited about would be Mason Plumlee. Otherwise, Steven Adams, Andre Drummond, and Clint Capella, if they can come relatively cheap, I would be absolutely down for that. Lastly, before we take it to break, and this one, let's just keep our reasoning's pretty short because I want to run through these quickly. These are the untraditional spacing bigs. I'll give you 4 options and you tell me your top two. Brooke Lopez, Thomas Bryant, former Laker Thomas Bryant, Larry Nance, also a former Laker, and Chris Boucher. So obviously, Brooke Lopez is more of a traditional center. The other 3 are more like, I don't know, spacing forward. So Brooke Lopez, Thomas Bryant, Larry Nance, Chris Boucher. Who do you like out of that list?
My top two on this list would be probably number one, Larry Nance, and number two, Thomas Bryant. The Thomas Bryant thing is interesting because it
Mm,
would be his third tenure with us. So
that
I don't
is
know if
interesting.
he would be down for it. But I think Thomas Bryant, he had a really nice stretch for us before we traded him. He has had very limited minutes since then, which is ironic because he allegedly asked to be traded for more of an opportunity. Yeah, everybody remembers he went to Denver and didn't play, and then went to Miami, and then I think he's with Indiana now. And so anyway, but I think he showed a developing skill set that I think JJ could really harness, and turn him into a really serviceable player. He's got a high motor, and he's just like some fundamentals aren't quite there, but I think he could get there on his third term with us with JJ. And then Larry Nance is just a solid all around, like he'll play defense, he'll defend up, he can shoot a little bit, he can pass very well for a player with his sort of archetype. He's like a very good connector piece, low drama, high character, really, really solid team player.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on the Larry Nance point. I still would probably put Brooke Lopez number one. I'm not necessarily trying to overthink things. I know that he's probably cooked now, mobility wise, but he's still a big 7 foot body who can bang down low against those burlier centers. And then he can also space the floor for you. So I would go Brooke Lopez number one and then Larry Nance number two. All right, with that said, let's take it to a quick break. When we get back, let's talk about some younger players in the Jericho Sims mold. All right, so we are back. Before we get back to the free agency options, Tommy, there are two trade target bigs that I want to toss your way that we weren't able to throw into our larger discussion last time. So I'm going to shoehorn them into this episode this time. So, real quick, before we get back into free agency, here are some cheap stopgap bigs to trade for who are more established that we haven't talked about, and they're of the spacing variety. Number one, Zach Collins. He's on an $18 million expiring contract next year. And then number two, Kelly Olynyk, $13 million expiring contract. I picked both of these players because they give us a dynamic that we don't currently have. A
Because they're
seven
both white.
footer. They're both exactly. No, we have a lot. We have a lot of
Racist.
that dynamic. We have a lot of
Yeah.
that dynamic. But at
Yeah.
the center position, someone who can space, but also pass the ball a little, and more importantly, also rebound. So Zach Collins, as a starter with the Bulls this season in 12 games, is averaging 14 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 58% from the field, hitting threes, averaging almost a block a game. Kelly Olynyk, very similar as a starter with the Pelicans, 11 points, 6.4 rebounds, 4 assists. 37% from three. And I just like getting these offensively versatile 7 footers who can dribble, pass, shoot. Maybe they're not exactly the rim protectors or defenders you necessarily want, but they're tall, physical, and can rebound. So, your thoughts on those two players very, very quickly?
I really like both of these players. I mean, to your point, they're not like above the rim type of what you would think of as a traditional rim protector, but they're so strong. I mean, we saw it like, Kelly Olynyk sort of has a reputation at this point, but Collins, I guess, because he's been hurt a lot the last few years. I feel like I haven't heard as much about him, but when we played the Bulls a couple times recently, I mean, that dude hits people. I mean, he knocks people around down
Yeah.
there. And to your point about like an enforcer type, I think he really fits the bill. He's really developed his game, and he was on a really strong upward trajectory before he started getting hurt. I mean, there's a reason he has this contract that feels like kind of ridiculous now with all of his injuries in recent years, but
Well,
he's he
he's been healthy, but the thing that kind of pushed him out of San Antonio was Wembanyama. There was like kind of no use for him. He was their starting center last or 2 years ago, and then he got pushed to the bench, and they were like, "Oh, we can just trade you as salary ballast." So
Yeah, yeah. So I I think he's a really talented player. It starts to become tricky because it's like 18 million is still a pretty significant commitment. And I know Elena makes quite a bit less than that. So it's close, but I mean I would take either of those two guys to be honest.
yeah, for sure. All right, back to the free agent big man options. This time we're talking about the younger, more unproven guys. Uh, I'll start listing them out. You tell me who your top options are. First, more experienced young guns. Dayron Sharp, restricted free agent. Let's just assume he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. Santi Aldama from the Grizzlies, also a restricted free agent. Let's assume he's an unrestricted free agent and will take the full MLE. Unlikely. But Dayron Sharp, Santi Aldama, Luke Cornett, 29 years old, going to be an unrestricted free agent. And then Precious Achua from the Knicks, 25 years old, going to be an unrestricted free agent. So out of these quote unquote proven young guns, who would you prefer or most like?
Um so I don't know enough about Aldama's defense. I know that Desmond Bain nearly killed him on the bench because he wasn't playing defense. So maybe that's not a great sign, but Aldama is like one of these bigs who shoots like he's 6 inches shorter than he actually is. I mean, it
He,
feels like he just hits all. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say he's kind of like the Zach Collins, Kelly Olynyk mold, but maybe even more proficient as a shooter.
Yeah, yeah. So I've always kind of liked his game. And then Dayron Sharp, I got more into over the course of the season as we sort of explored that as an option. I don't know that either of these guys are going to be realistic for us, but
Hmm.
those are the two names that sort of stand out to me.
Yeah, so Santi Aldama, 12 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists on 36% shooting. He's a very well rounded offensive big, but he's not exactly a center. And I feel like he'll likely get paid at least the non taxpayer MLE. And then Daron Sharp, I would absolutely love on this team. I know I'm a little higher on him than most other people. This season, Sharp averaged 8 points, 6.6 rebounds, 2 assists, zero point 0.8 steals, zero point 0.8 blocks in limited minutes. He's a very well rounded center who can kind of do everything besides space, although he did hit a couple of 3 pointers this season as well. He's an underrated connective passer at the center spot. He had a 25 point, 15 rebound, 5 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks game versus the Thunder this season, which is just a ridiculous combination of stats for a big man. I believe he even hit a 3 in that game as well. And overall, the dude is just a bully ball freight train with insane motor. He has a career per 36 rebounding average that's almost similar to Andre Drummond's as well. He averages 14 rebounds for his career per 36 wise. Andre Drummond averages 16 rebounds per 36. So yeah, I would be absolutely down for Daron Sharp at the taxpayer MLE if he would somehow take that, or if the Brooklyn Nets somehow relinquished him, or even for a portion of the non-taxpayer MLE if we're able to open that up. But yeah, it remains to be seen whether the Brooklyn Nets will renounce Daron Sharp's rights, and it remains to be seen whether the Memphis Grizzlies just let Santi Aldama straight up walk. So probably unlikely for both of those players. Otherwise, Precious Achua, realistic option, I guess. Another sort of big man in a different sense to Jackson Hayes. All right, lastly, the unproven bigs. This is where the Jericho Sims player goes. Um, your thoughts on Kai Jones, who's been killing it for the Mavs, but Lively and Gafford are back, and who knows if they need to carry like four of the same type of bigs. Kai Jones, Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Jackson, who tore his Achilles, and James Wiseman, who tore his Achilles. So I don't know. Maybe this is a very easy list to parse out. But yeah, Kai Jones, Isaiah Jackson, James Wiseman, and Marvin Bagley, who ironically the Kings picked #1 over Luka Doncic during their draft. Do any of these entice you, or are you more still in the Jericho Sims camp?
I'm still more in the Jericho Sims camp, but I would say that, Wiseman, to the extent he's going to be fully recovered by next season, I would have definitely throw a flyer at him. He is someone, I mean, maybe a bust, quote unquote, for where he was picked, but he could be, I mean, he was a high lotto pick, right? It was like maybe not the right pick at that time for the Warriors, but it wasn't like they took a guy who was projected to go 55. He was projected to be like a high lotto pick, and it just didn't work out, and he never really got a chance to develop. And that's actually an interesting one, because it's like he could be a interesting reclamation project playing with LeBron and Luca for 1 year and really upping his value. So he's one guy I would be interested in. Kai Jones, I like him athletically, and he's gonna have some highlight plays. He's just like too much of a head case, I think, for a team that is trying to like actually contend.
Yeah, we'll see. I think for me, I've been a huge Isaiah Jackson fan, and when he tore his Achilles, I thought for sure we were going to go after him this trade deadline, but obviously he tore his Achilles in October, so those plans got dashed. But if he's back and healthy, I would put Isaiah Jackson up there. But I've seen enough from Kai Jones with the Mavericks, and he's actually helped them win games while Anthony Davis was injured, that I'm like, dude, you put this guy next to Luca, and it's probably over, because he's even more explosive and has the measurables that Jackson Hayes doesn't have. Isaiah Jackson is similar as well. He's kind of like a DeAndre Jordan with some surprising jump shooting potential.
The Kai
Um,
Jones issue is just the off court stuff. It's not
yeah, but I
really.
mean, he's just kind of kooky. I'm fine with that as long as he's not beating people up and stuff like that. But who knows? You're right. Maybe Trey Jameson, Jackson Hayes, and Kai Jones will be too much of a clown show. But yeah. And then James Wiseman, I think I'm out on at this point. He was already a very volatile and shaky defender as it was. And I don't think this recent Achilles heel injury will help things, obviously. But at the end of the day, he is 7'1" with a 7'6" wingspan. So those measurables will always be tantalizing and intriguing. And he's still only 24 years old. I'm just not sure if the Lakers are the team who should gamble on another young prospect who doesn't necessarily have high basketball IQ like James Wiseman. And then Marvin Bagley, Luka Doncic's draft class counterpart. He's only 26 years old. He got traded to the Memphis Grizzlies towards the end of the season. He did have a couple of solid games for them down the stretch in random fill in minutes, like 25 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists game versus the Mavericks, 17 points, 8 of 8 from the field game versus OKC. He can rebound, he can score, but I'm just not sure he's the type of defensive center that we'd want. Off the bench, playing that sort of like Christian Wood, big man who can score and rebound role, that's fine. But yeah, I guess I would take Marvin Bagley as a flyer as your 14th, 15th man for the veteran minimum. But I think there are other prospects that we should probably prioritize, even when it comes to young big men. With that said, that'll do it for our very early look at big man on the free agency market. These are all stopgap mid-tier bigs who can be had for the veteran minimum, BAE, or even the full taxpayer MLE. With that said, we will catch you guys next time. And Tommy, see you later.
Peace.
Laters.